Right. Good afternoon again, honorable members. If we can just grab our seats and try to settle down. First of all, I would like to firstly apologize for the fact that we have been ahead of our own schedule. As you may know, since you heard this morning when the Speaker of the National Assembly spoke, this particular forum is the first of its kind, learning from Brazil last year in their presidency, where they established the women's component of the P20. And this is also our first time convening this. There's obviously, for this particular session, 6 countries that had confirmed their attendance, and we've got 4 of the 6 that are in attendance, inclusive of South Africa. So I just want to apologize that we did conclude a bit early. Obviously, it's our learning curve, but I think it's important for us to continue these sessions, and I think the more stable it becomes going forward, the more formally structured it will be. So at the moment, we've invited one of our House chairpersons in the National Assembly. In fact, he's the chair of chairs in the National Assembly in the Parliament of South Africa, who also sits on COP, where he's going to be speaking to us a bit about climate change. Our session then thereafter will be taken over by the presentation that we're supposed to have just before lunch. That particular team is already on their way here. They're about 20 minutes out, so we've got a 20-minute time difference to have a discussion with the House Chair on climate change. So I'm going to invite him to come and speak to us as young parliamentarians in this particular session, so we can get some insight and start a discussion going around climate change. So I would like to invite the Honourable Mr. Froelich to come and address us today, please. Thanks.
No, thank you very much, Program Director, and good afternoon to all the participants. I think it's a good opportunity for us to reflect on where and how far we have come from in terms of the discussions and debates around climate change. My name is Cedric Froelich. I am the House Chairperson in the National Assembly, as introduced by my colleague. But I'm also the person who has been mandated by Parliament since 2010 to attend these different climate change conferences, wherever they occur. And in the not so distant past, and I think my colleague from the UK will recall that there is a body called GLOBE, the Global Legislators Forum on Climate Change. My predecessor was Lord Debon, that is still in the House of Lords. And I took over that presidency from him in 2013 until 2017 to engage parliamentarians so that we have a critical mass of MPs who play an advocacy role in their parliaments when it comes to matters of climate change. Globe had a session about a month ago in Rio, in Brazil, where matters of climate change were discussed with the Federal Republic of Brazil. And during the first week of November, the Climate Parliament will be convening, consisting of members of Parliament from across the world, to ensure that the voices of parliamentarians are heard in the discussions that are taking place. Now, when we talk about COP, and you ask people what their opinion is, what COP is about, you get different types of answers. But in fact, it's a conference of parties, and the parties are the governments of the world who are getting together to come and take stock and reflect on the progress that has been made, especially in terms of the implementation of the Paris Agreement of 2015, and what the uptake of parliaments are, and whether they are meeting their commitments that are given at these climate change conferences. What has been a feature of climate change conferences in the past is that you have governments that go and negotiate, government negotiators discuss, And then there is, as part of COP, what they call a leaders summit that takes place. That is the big gathering. And I tend to call it, it's like the Oscar Awards, the Hollywood, with a red carpet being rolled out and leaders of the world come there and they walk and they take their photos and make their statements and they're gone, and next year they come back and they do exactly the same thing. We're not sure how beneficial the outcomes are when it hardly gets implemented. Now, who is responsible for keeping these government leaders, the presidents, prime ministers, as well as the ministers, accountable for the implementation of their own government commitments on a multilateral United Nations forum on climate change? It's members of parliament. And very often, members of parliament do not realize the immense power that they have in ensuring that commitments that our leaders go and give on multilateral forums, in fact, are met. But let's go a step down. How do we ensure that when governments go there, that they reflect a view of society, the different sectors in society, the vulnerable in society, those who are more affected than others in society? Because climate change also leads to more inequalities across the world. Or has it become the technocrats who develop these instruments and inputs, and they go and it is done there, and they come back? What practical measures can we employ in ensuring that we change the status quo? And it can only come, honorable members, from closer scrutiny of commitments that our countries give at the UFCCC. And this scrutiny must happen in parliaments. It must happen in the committees that are affected. When a commitment is given, the first question that arises, where's the money going to come from? Who's going to pay for it? Because making a commitment is one thing on paper, but if there is no financing mechanism, then it just remains a commitment on paper. But apart from the financing aspect, when we go further and say, but what advocacy work is being done in our local constituencies where we are around climate change, then you get different answers, mixed responses again. The Interparliamentary Union, with who we are presenting and hosting this important conference, has over the years created certain mechanisms, standing committees is what they call it, sustainable development, where discussions like this take place. But we must guard against honorable members attending events that is only an event, and when we go back home, absolutely nothing changes. And then the day comes, like it is happening now in our own country in KwaZulu-Natal, where a cyclone is approaching the East Coast. And then all of a sudden, all of us starts thinking again about climate change. Now, cyclones have been there for centuries, but what has changed is the ferocity and the fierceness of the climatic disasters that we are experiencing. And it's becoming more regular as well. What are we going to say to those people there? Are we going to go once again and we give immediate disaster support, disaster relief, or are we moving towards a more sustainable path of adaptation and mitigation so that local communities know exactly what to do when these events occur? But even worse than that, we have a contestation for resources in our countries, financial resources, to ensure that infrastructure programs are rolled out. That includes housing, roads, and all those type of things. And in one afternoon, everything can be wiped out. It's gone. It's no longer there. And it puts us back once again. But even worse is that the legislators who are sitting here are, apart from making the laws, and there's a number of countries that have developed climate change acts, Climate Change Act became the buzzword. We have got one. So what? If the act is there and it doesn't get implemented, it's not budgeted for, it means absolutely nothing. So then, members of parliament sit and the Minister of Finance table the budget and everything is there and we say, yay, we agree. Yeah, it's fine, do that. We even in these budgets agree these days that there must be a carbon tax. But we don't follow what happened to the money that is collected by a carbon tax. Does it really meet the demands that we have? When the budget is passed, it's gone, implementation takes place. But do we really ask, in terms of adaptation and mitigation, what are local governments doing in terms of changing the way that they have been doing planning? Are people still allowed to settle, and it's often the poor people who are subjected to this, settle in areas that are prone to climate change-induced disasters? Because very often you'll find that those who are better off in society, the rich, the enabled, they're hardly affected by it because they've got the money to make the necessary preparations. The question is, what needs to be done by members of parliament? We need to scrutinize these budgets. We also have to call the relevant ministers, whether it is in transport, human settlements, housing, local government, to say, but what is your planning looking like? We need to engage and find out what is the energy policy of our country. Where do we get our energy resources from? Is it sustainable? Or is it categorized as those that cause harm to the environment? And how do we start and engage as parliamentarians in those discussions? And very often you find that those who go to the climate change conferences on behalf of government do not have these type of discussions in our parliaments. Why not? We don't need to wait for them to say they want to come and discuss it with us. You call them. You tell them, you must come and account. We want to know what is the energy policy, and in terms of our commitments at the UNFCCC, how far are we in implementing it, and how realistic are those policies? The second part of finance, and that is what has emanated at the climate change conferences. You will hear the outcomes to say the rich countries of the world has committed billions of dollars. Billions. And we think it's a lot of money, but it's nowhere near the commitments that was made in the past. In fact, it's a drop in the ocean in terms of what was committed to change and turn around the situation. But even there where money is being committed, you do get the sense, and that is my personal experience, that very often money is being thrown at the problem with little or no understanding from the implementers as to how they are going to do it. We have an example, and we've learned valuable lessons out of it, in terms of the just energy transition. Because South Africa was fortunate enough as one of those countries, about 3 years ago, where we were granted, I must use my words carefully, honorable member, we received grants, conditional grants and so on, and interest-bearing loans. There's nothing that's free that's coming out of these conferences. They expect you still to pay for it. But then the problem arose in terms of the just energy transition that we are piloting in Mpumalanga, is that are we deriving the desired objectives and outcomes? Are we meeting those objectives and targets that were set? And quite frankly, it's been an uphill task. And the uphill task, one, emanates from the discussion that must take place before throwing the money with local communities. Now, for those who are visitors to our country, Mpumalanga, the economy is primarily driven by coal mines. There's coal towns. There's hundreds of thousands of people living in those towns. In fact, the people who are directly employed in those mines is not less than 80,000 direct jobs. And then the indirect jobs is a multiplier effect of 5, so it takes you to half 500,000, 400 to 500,000 people. So now if you go there in the just energy transition that is not too well planned, and you say, we're closing the mine. We're changing this ugly coal mine that all of you have been working in for years, generations have been working in, we're closing it, we're shutting it down. What is the impact on local communities? What is the impact on their livelihoods? Are they ready as unskilled workers to transition from a coal mine into a green venture? Do they have the skills? Do they have the years of active employment left? Because a lot of them are older than 50, they're closer to retirement. And there's another generation that comes in that's looking for jobs in these mines. And so this vicious circle or cycle will continue. And it all deals with the preparation that needs to be done beforehand. And while governments, whether they're committed or not, are important role players in this, we can only determine their commitment by a direct engagement and unpacking these difficult questions. Because as a member of parliament, whether you're in Australia, where we had a year ago runaway bushveld fires and there's floods taking place, in Los Angeles there were fires and there's floods taking place after the fires in Australia, all of us are in this together and we are affected. I know also our colleagues in Europe, Spain and Italy, they suffer from the impact of climate-induced disasters. Now, what should we do, apart from accountability in parliaments and all these things that we're talking about, is to ensure that our parliaments design a bottom-up approach before we can effectively engage on behalf of our communities. In your constituency, what are the discussions that are being initiated and driven by your office in terms of climate change? What do we tell the farmers and the farm workers who can no longer farm on their land that they have for centuries because of a lack of rainfall, or that the land has turned arid, or that the weather patterns has changed to such an extent that the crops that they used to farm with is no longer viable? What type of assistance do we provide to them? How do we, on a practical level, engage young people so that they have a direct understanding and the relationship between the earth that we live on and also the environment that needs to be there for us to have future generations? Now, very selfishly, of course, you have countries in the world that will say, and I quote, "Pump, baby, pump the fuel. It must go, it must roll." Very selfishly, because you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. Because it's not sustainable. Because you see the beauty, unlike wars, where you can dispatch fighter jets to go and bomb another country, climate change has no boundaries. It will hit you when you least expect it. You can have the best defense systems in the world. It won't stop the impact of climate change. And that's why it is important for young parliamentarians to ask these critical questions and to become involved in and with the outcomes and future projections that will be taking place at climate change conferences. It's no longer good enough to read in a newspaper or to read in a parliamentary or government bulletin that UFCCC is meeting in Belém this year. They will be there for 14 days and they will discuss X, Y, and Z. Or to watch news channels on TV. And then that is it. Because the impact is felt by our people. And the impact is felt predominantly by poor people of the world. In Africa, and we've been responsible for the smallest percentage of emissions in the world, but we feel the impact the greatest. And that's why there is a moral obligation, whether you come from a rich country, a developing country, or poor country, for all of us to collaborate with one another and to change the scenario that is there. unless we move with common purpose, we won't be able to slow down the impact of climate change. Temperatures in the world will increase, continuously increase. We have missed the target of 1.5 degrees. We are closer now to 3 degrees. And we are getting used to the heat until we reach the point of no return. If we want a sustainable future, we must encourage the bottom-up approach. But you in your parliaments must also actively fight for a seat at the table where these discussions are taking place. Seat at the table, and you must become part of these delegations that go to these climate change conferences, so that you can go and see what is happening there. The climate change conferences has become, and the character has changed to such an extent, that you even find your main polluters, the companies, are also attending the climate change conference now, doing their own advocacy as to why they should continue using non-renewables in energy generation and for domestic use. So we must become part of their discussion. We must ensure that where the delegation from your country meet, that members of parliament are there to hear what they say. And to hear also where compromises are made. Because at those conferences, it's easy for those who want to influence others to dangle a carrot in front of them to say, you know what, we can give you the following. We can support you on this program if you support us to stay the same and not to change. And that will be the greatest crime against humanity that can be committed. Because future generations will pay the price. It will be a very expensive price to pay. And it's better to take action now to prevent further losses in future. And we must encourage our governments to do more than what they are doing at the moment. The transition, yes, it's not easy because there's no blueprint for the transition. But it's inevitable that we have to move to new types of technologies. It's important that those who sit with the intellectual property of the new technologies share those technologies for the common good, so that those who do not have the technology and cannot buy the technology have access to that technology. We must also ensure that trade offs between countries on different things doesn't get to the level where it impacts on our moral obligation that we have made and commitments that we have given towards our people and future generations. I hope I will see some of you in Belém. Belém in Brazil is very close to the indigenous peoples in the Amazon area. And there will probably be an opportunity to go and see what the impact is of climate change in the Amazon. So the key themes for this conference includes climate finance, working on nature-based solutions, encouraging the development of indigenous leadership in communities, in decision-making, because they feel the impact. The transition that must take place as far as renewable energy capacity and energy efficiency is concerned, and adaptation and resilience. We can only achieve this through global cooperation by implementing commitments and nationally determined contributions that is referred to as NDCs, and innovation, using new innovations. There will be a number of different thematic days that will take place at the conference that includes a focus on food and agriculture, energy and industry, forest and biodiversity, and cities of the future and infrastructure. The ultimate aim is to accelerate climate action, promote global cooperation, and enhance climate resilience with a focus on implementing climate commitments and showcasing climate solutions and innovations. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, House Chair Froelich. I think that was very insightful, colleagues, to get that type of discussion. But before we go into the colleagues that are supposed to come present to us, I would like to open up a round on what has just been presented to us and the role that we need to play as parliamentarians, especially young parliamentarians, in finding a seat at the table to bring these topics up, but more so than anything, to play an oversight responsibility on the executive undertakings that are taken by our different governments in our different countries. So I would just like to give an opportunity for anyone that wants to make an input on climate change or an input on what has been presented. Fasia? Yeah, you can go. You can use your mic.
Thank
and
you.
I'll take you, Honorable Kobe, next.
All right.
And
Thank you
then
very
3,
much.
4, 5.
My name is Fasiha. Apart from being a South African parliamentarian, I also sit in the Portfolio Committee for Energy, and I also sit in the Committee for Mineral and Petroleum Resources. So quite everything that House Chair is dealing with is sort of bread and butter for us. So just a few points. The first is related to the delegations that go to COP. I think one of the challenges, House Chair, and it's a bit of a double whammy. In one way, many countries want to send their more senior parliamentarians, completely understandable. But what that often does is it closes out the space to young people, because many of us have just been elected one time or second time MPs at most. And then what you do have is a delegation, and I don't mean this about the South African, I mean this generally, that just excludes young people. So I'm interested in House Chair's thoughts about how we think about that differently. Do we need to propose at COP that delegations need to be more reflective of demographics, age, etc.? That's the first point. The second point is about balancing the green agenda with the developmental agenda. And it often becomes a situation in which it's one or the other, right? And I think in our own country, it's become very polarized. You're either for the green agenda or you, which sort of means implicitly, and this is not the case, but it's taken to mean that you're anti-developmental. And I think what we're missing, especially in a lot of the countries that are represented here today, is the link between the two. So that in order for us to create that developmental state, to bring about an end to poverty, inequality, etc., a critical part of that is the green economy. So I'm just interested in thoughts on that process. And the very last point, if you'll allow me, Chair, is around the critical minerals. Ferrochrome is a very big one. I know South Africa has, I think, 80% of the world's chrome, iron ore kind of thing. But again, being left behind by the skills development thing. So again, Africa being looked at with an extractive lens. So our job really is just to mine out the requirements for battery energy storage, for lithium, whatever it is, and then hand it over. And I'm just interested to know whether that's going to feature a lot in the COP discussion, and whether we can actually have a more meaningful seat at that table beyond the extractivism kind of politic. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Fasia. Honorable Kobe.
Thank you so much. I think Fasia was copying a bit of my notes because she has taken up most of the things that I wanted to say. But thank you so much for that very insightful presentation, House Chair. My issue, Chair, is that a lot of the issues of, a lot of the issues that you spoke about, I think they're cross-cutting. We have various portfolios that we serve in where we see that climate change plays quite an important role. So I serve on water and sanitation and public works and infrastructure, and we're seeing that because of the frequency now of climate change-induced disasters, we see that we are now finding ourselves in a place where even water and sanitation is compromised, and also the infrastructure that is supposed to carry out our end goals of service delivery. Now, because it is such a top-up approach at the current moment, how do we then filter it down so that when we speak to municipalities about the infrastructure that they have, it speaks to climate resilience? When we speak about the SDG goals of ensuring that everybody receives, there's universal access of water and sanitation. How does that agenda come right down to the grassroots levels where we must ensure reliable water supply for our people? So I think for me, I think there needs to be a much greater collaboration, and not just at a climate change level, but let us look at the various portfolios or sectors that are cross-cutting and that are affected by global changes. Without us addressing this common issue of climate change, I think it will be very difficult for many other sectors to achieve their objectives. Thank you, House Chair.
Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Oh,
Right next to you, then it's you. Thanks, my brother.
Thanks, Chair, and greetings once again. I'm Sizopila Mkize. I think I just wanted to maybe anchor what the House Chair was saying, coming from a part of South Africa where we are always year in, year out facing the issue of floods, and I can tell you that this year is not going to end without us having people who are now homeless, having their houses washed out by heavy rains. Sometimes the rains are not even heavy, it's just that people have built their houses in wetlands already. And I think it's one of the things that are very important is the awareness to the people, particularly the poor communities, because they'll just build wherever, whether it's a wetland, whether it's a sandy land, they'll just build wherever. And I think it's one of the things that is very, very important for us is the awareness part about the climate change, because people in the deep rural areas, they don't even understand what is happening. They don't understand the impact of building in a wetland. They don't understand how important it is for you to actually have people who are going to come and check your land if it is okay for you to build there. And perhaps we need to be able to assist people on those matters. But I think I'd like to anchor also that for many times parliamentarians, whether young or old, have been accused in the world of having these sessions as talk shows, and there's no tracking of implementation of whatever resolutions that, for instance, we would have taken here. And I think it's quite important that we tighten that ship when it comes to tracking the resolutions that we would have taken here. There's a big debate when it comes to energy, FASEA, whether we move from coal or we stay with coal, taxing the carbon taxes. And there's a big debate on that, and I think it's something that we need to get into and actually try and find common ground on it, because as things stand, how we deal with climate change, how we deal with global warming, we have different views. But I believe that it's very important as politicians and as parliamentarians that in one way or the other we find common grounds, because at the end of the day, the future generations are the ones that are going to suffer. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mkize. Next to you.
thank you, Chair, and thank you, House Chairperson, for the remarks. I think there's an acceptance that climate change is a global crisis, and when there's an acceptance from each and every country, that means that we all have the responsibility to commit in seeing that we save the endangered human race and the natural species that you might find existing in the world. But what is important about the Paris climate change agreement is that it's very clear that by the financial commitments of that 100 USD billion that was set in 2022, till today it has not been met. And it is very specific to say that these are the developing countries that they are supposed to that they are making this commitment, and then that itself tells you that the highest polluters, they are the developing countries, because they are the ones that are contributing to make that that commitment. And that itself, it then tells us that we need to strike a balance, focusing on the future, to say that it would not be very precise or fair to say that those who are lower polluters, they must be agreeing and implementing these initiatives whilst they still are faced with, or their economy still needs to be developed and be industrialized. Why am I saying so? I'm saying so because if the highest polluter is not himself or herself is not implementing those mitigating or adaptation measures, but the person that is funded is not even the highest polluter, it is unfair. But what should be the principle? The principle is that the highest polluter must pay. It means that the one that pollutes the most is supposed to pay. The one that has the lowest emissions that are acceptable is not even supposed to pay, but supposed to have a range or a figure for them to be able to allow them to industrialize, to continue to work, because it's not balanced. The development of all these countries is not balanced. So the principle that we should agree on is that the highest polluter must be the one that must pay. Two is that the financial commitments, they must come through, because we understand that now it's till 2025, that 100 billion USD has been extended till 2025, but it's not yet been there. Then it means that two, it must come through. Three, it means that countries that are involved and agreeing in COP70, they have to be consistent, accurate, and transparent reporting on the work that they are supposed to be doing to, as far as adaptation and mitigation is concerned. And then fourthly, it will be the issue to say that it is our responsibility to say that we must have the climate change be infused in our curriculum, because it's for the future. It means that we must start to have in our curriculum, in as much as there are eco schools, but we need to teach the children at the primary, at the secondary level, that they must start to be involved in climate change initiatives and start to change their understanding, change their culture and the practice at the very young age, so that when they are older, that they understand all these practices. I think that will be all. That will be my submission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Member. Over to you, my brother.
Oh, no. Thanks very much, Chair of the session. My name is Stephen Skwakwa, a delegate from Mpumalanga Provincial Legislature, and also a member serving in the Portfolio Committee of Economic Development and Tourism. Chair, I think, Chair, the issue of just transition, energy transition, it directly affects us as in Mpumalanga Province, particularly because we're the biggest contributor of approximately 80 to 85% in coal output in the country. But yet, Chair, the issue of the biggest job creation is within the mining, in the coal industry in particular. But we are puzzled, Chair, because of the issue of the just energy transition. The approach of it hasn't involved community participation. And that's why we are concerned of, because we can't take an upper and downward approach. It must be downward and upper approach, meaning the community that suffers the most, the community of Emalahleni, Kriel, in particular in the Lowveld area of Mpumalanga Province, they're the one that will be suffer, because in particular, we automatically must deal with the issue of just energy transition, but also checking again the issue of job creation, the jobs that will be losing, in particular if we transit to just energy transition. And we must be fair enough and be frank that we are not ready, as the chair alluded, we are not yet ready for transitioning to a just energy transition, although it must eventually happen in future when we move forward. But we must make our communities ready, the market itself and the job itself. We must be able to say, when we close the coal-fired power stations, where will these people go? And in particular, in Mpumalanga Province. The people who are working there in Mpumalanga Province. We must look upon upon that as well, the skills development. Because this energy transition, it comes, yes, we accept that there is a funding, but that funding with conditions that are there. But in particular, the issue of skills development, where will these people be employed to? And in particular, because we are directly affected as in Mpumalanga province, and we cannot say we close the coal-fired power stations now, but other countries are continuing to import, taking the coal in Mpumalanga province, in particular in our country, and taking it outside the country, utilizing it outside. So I think we must have a policy that speaks about the biggest polluters are the ones that must pay. So we must develop that policy that comes off with inclusivity, because part of us being here, we are here not representing ourselves, but representing our people at the ground level and speaking for themselves. We must speak for them, so that when we take decisions, we take policies. Those policies include our people that are marginalized and the poor people that are there, including the people who are working currently in the mining, coal mining, so that we take an inclusive approach that will be able to accommodate everyone along the process. I think that was my comment, Chair. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Honourable Member. Are there any other contributions, colleagues, that one wants to make? Honourable Kumbaka.
No, thank you very much, Chairperson of the session. Mine is just very short. I think, firstly, as these countries here, we need to enforce, local adaptation planning in our various countries. I believe every province and every municipality or state, regardless of how you call it in your country, must be compelled to publish, and update climate risk assessments and adaptation plans. I think that's where it starts. Everything starts at a local level. So I think we need to enforce that. And I think climate audits need to be introduced and also published, because usually they're not as accurate as we think they might be. So I think it's very important that they go to our parliaments, those climate audit assessments. And, I think even climate financing needs to be reformed. Also, we need to find ways and solutions on how we can work on that. And lastly, I think we also need to ensure that, like climate financing must be embedded like in our national budgets across. I think that's another thing we take for granted. But the point I want to emphasize the most is the local level, and and ensuring that there's adaptation planning at the local level, because it all starts there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much, Honourable Member. Thank you so much, colleagues, for those inputs. I'm going to hand over to you, Italy. You want to say something? Cool.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the initial remarks, from which I agree on the majority of points. I would like to put on the table another principle. I think it would be meaningful and relevant for us to discuss about. I very much agree on the principle that we have just stated, that is, who pollutes the most should be the one paying the highest cost. I think this is very reasonable and fair. It's about being fair in this. I would like to add another principle, and I would love to hear your perspective on this. And the principle is the following, that corruption, especially among politicians, has a devastating impact on resources allocated to the fight against climate change, diverting essential funds, increasing project costs, compromising their effectiveness, and damaging public trust in climate action. I very much agree on debating on how much the cost for climate change is and who is that should pay the most. I also would like to discuss a bit more on how and what can actually deliver outputs on this, because young generations is expecting outcomes more than any other thing. So I actually would like even to formally suggest to include one point in the drafting, if we are still in time for this, about this. So the concept of of corruption. I think this is something that we owe to the young generation, to try and build a governance, a political establishment that is less corrupted and more transparent, so that it can deliver more also on the side of the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honourable Member from Italy. Your point is definitely taken, and the drafting team is here, so they would have taken note of that. Are there any other inputs before I hand over back to House Chair Froelich?
Thank you. Can I thank the Chair of Chairs for his excellent contribution to initiating this debate. I'm here on behalf of the IPU, but I'm also a UK Member of Parliament, and I just talk from my experience. And I think one of the things that's unspoken at an international level is that times are changing for the more developed economies and countries around the world. And we've had an excellent contribution from alongside me about bringing on community in countries like South Africa. We're losing communities in countries that are more developed. And so when we talk about wealthier countries making a greater contribution, in the end that comes down to, do governments in those countries retain the support of the voters in their own countries? And I think that is changing. We've seen it change in the United States, and a politics of nationalism is replacing a politics of multilateralism. And I think that trend is going to continue. And so unless you bring on board working class, poorer communities in developed countries, and we have a change and a real effort to do that, because they are starting to think about their own self-interest, their own condition, then I think we're going to struggle to keep this agenda moving forward as successfully as it has perhaps in the past decade or two.
Thank you so much, Honourable Cardin. Final round, Honourable Member from Algeria.
مساء الخير. هو في الحقيقة لدي مداخلة قصيرة.
Good afternoon.
أول شيء هو أثمن ما تدخل به الزميل النائب.
Algeria attaches paramount importance to the youth issues, considering them fundamental pillar of development and a driving force for building the future. The state had made their economic, political, and social empowerment a strategic choice. The 2020 Constitution clearly enshrines the orientation. Article 6 affirms that the state works to encourage youth participation in national development, while Article 71 guarantees freedom of innovation and invention as a right for all citizens. This provides a solid legal basis to promoting interpretation. In line with this constitutional principles, Algeria has established a legal and institutional
في الدول التي تعاني تدهورا في المناخ وتحولا في
Algeria has established a legal and an institutional framework to support youth entrepreneurship. Law 2020-02 of 19 March 2020 on the creation of startups was enacted, granting tax and administrative incentives to encourage young people to launch their own projects. Additionally, the Algerian Startup Fund was created as foster the development of the digital economy. This approach was further reinforced by Law 2118 of December 2021 on the investment, which establishes a framework of encourage both national and foreign investments, offering benefits of small, medium-sized and small startups.
All right, thank you so much, Algeria, for that input. I am now going to hand over back
For
to
young people to
the
benefit
Honourable Froelich, House Chair, to just reflect on some of the stuff that we've pointed out and maybe answer one or two questions that were asked. Over to you again.
No, thank you very much, Program Director. Just briefly, I won't be able to respond in detail to each and every one because I think it's important to get the discussion going so that when we return to our respective parliaments and the committees that we serve in, that we continue this advocacy work. Of course, it's important for the representation at climate change conferences to reflect the reality and the reality in parliaments. And I encourage young people to continuously fight and push for their space in all work of Parliament, irrespective. There's no no-go areas. And we also have a responsibility as leaders in Parliament to ensure that that is reflected. When South Africa had to come up with an approach after the COVID-19 pandemic for our economic recovery, the government adopted a green recovery post-COVID-19. And this green recovery is linked in balancing the green agenda on the one hand and the development agenda to make those types of adjustments, but also to ensure that we do get investment coming into the country and change the way that our industries function, because we know it's not sustainable. But it's not a matter of switching off one day and starting the next morning with something else. And that's why the transition is so important, and it must also meet the development needs of the country. Africa is richly endowed with critical minerals that is required for the new economy around the world, and that's why I look forward to see the Common Africa position at the Climate Change Conference in Belém on the critical mineral strategy, because that for us will give us the leveraging point and the negotiating point when we sit down with the richer countries of the world. They need something that we have, we need something that they have, and there must be an exchange that takes place on a realistic scale. I've been part of discussions in the last while that focus on disaster risk reduction. Now that's a big word, disaster risk reduction, because it's talking about a lot of things that has been referred to. What do we need to do to mitigate and to adapt towards the climate change challenges that we are facing and the disasters that may possibly take place? With all due respect, in most countries of the world, but more so also in South Africa, where we are still addressing the legacy of the apartheid dispensation that we have, our cities and areas were simply not designed to cope with the threats of climate change. That's why you see our sewage systems is not suitable, it's too small. When it rains, the water, the bulk of water that comes down is simply too much. And we also do not at local government enforce local government bylaws. We just allow people to settle wherever they want to, and they place themselves at bigger risk. And that's why disaster reduction becomes important with advocacy. I fully agree with the comments that you've made around the commitments that is not being met and the polluter pay principle and transparent reporting. And I fully understand the challenges that's associated with Mpumalanga. And very soon we will, from Parliament, send another delegation to Mpumalanga to go and see the impact of the just transition on those communities that you are referring to. And there is a lot that we can learn from our colleagues in Europe, especially the UK, when they went to shut down the coal mines years ago and the disaster that the human disaster that played itself out in those areas. And we must learn so that we do not repeat the same mistakes. Good governance is absolutely important because we cannot afford to go and to say that we need assistance with X, Y, and Z, but when the resources come, it disappears. Or we can't even report on it at times. So good governance and ensuring that the funding that is made available reach the intended beneficiaries, but also serve the intended cause that we are trying to advance. And then lastly, the discussions amongst young people is important around nationalism, multilateralism. There's no replacement for multilateralism. If we try to replace and break down the multilateral structures, and although at times you find that progress seems to be non-existent or slow, it is still the best platform that we should have. And young parliamentarians, I want to call on you to continuously advance the calls of multilateralism, where the people of the world can sit together, governments can sit together to advance these discussions. Thank you very much, even though it was at the last minute, for this very insightful discussion. I can see a lot of the participants here on top of the discussions that are taking place, and how I wish that we can get more young people involved, because it will be easier then to change policies. It will be easier to change the governments, because you ultimately will sit in government. But I want to end off by saying that when you sit with parliamentarians before they're in government and you listen to what they say, it's absolutely music to the ears. However, as soon as they end up being in government, they change completely. And may I hope that that doesn't happen with the young parliamentarians. Carry that energy and vuma with you if you end up in your respective governments one day, so that we know then we have advocacy inside the corridors of power where decisions are made. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. House Chair, can we just say thank you and just give another round of applause to House Chair for that input. And thank you so much for the enriching contributions that all of you have made thus far. And we do have our drafting team obviously listening to all of our inputs, which will culminate in a document that we'll have to consider tomorrow based on the topics that we discuss over the next 2 days. Thank you again, House Chair. I know it was a bit of short notice, but very, very insightful points from your side. Let's welcome one of our African colleagues from Angola, Honorable Member. You're also welcome to join the session. We are now going to move on to the last presentation on this particular topic. Then I'm going to hand over to one of my colleagues for the last session for the day. And we're going to have one of our resource people coming to talk about the current situation of climate change and the international space. And obviously we'll have a conversation on that. The person who's going to come and present to us is Ms. Vonani Rekotso, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. She's the CEO of Hansa Pty Limited, a chair of the W20 Climate Justice, Environment and Food Security Task Team, and she has vast experience in collaboration with various stakeholders to develop strategies for reducing energy costs, transitioning to sustainable energy, and enhancing the efficiency of electrical systems. And with a robust background in electrical and mechanical engineering, Ms. Vonani also holds an MBA from Henley Business School, and her diverse work experience includes manufacturing vehicles in the automotive industry, BMW plant, serving as a railway track engineer at PRASA, and engaging in management consulting to boost profitability in the manufacturing, logistics, and mining sectors. Let's hand over to you, Ms. Vonani Rekotso, to come and speak to us. Over to you, ma'am.
I don't know if I'm able to project. Would I be able to project, or should I? Okay.
Did you want to project?
Yeah, but I don't have to. Yeah, I didn't. Okay. Good day to you all. As stated, my name is Vonani Rekotso.
I am a chair of Climate Justice, the Environment and Food Security at Women 20 under the leadership of Professor Nanya Bolamula. Our presidency is at the HRC. Today we'll talk a bit about the work that we do at W20, the current state of the climate, global greenhouse gas emissions, international policy and cooperation, and the potential, the untapped potential of women. Okay. Women 20, as you all know, is an official G20 engagement group. It consists of 5 task teams: financial inclusion, the care economy, gender-based violence and femicide, climate justice, the environment and food security, women in STEM and the digital divide, health equality for women and girls. And through Women 20, entrepreneurs, experts from G20 nation convene to craft consensus-based policy recommendation for the upliftment of women and girls. On the 12th to the 14th of October, we have our Women 20 Summit, where women leaders will convene in Johannesburg to have a dialogue and mainstream gender issues from the G20 nations. And these women consist of corporates, it consists of women leaders who share a common vision and a common goal for the upliftment of women and girls. In our task team, I am chairing alongside a lady called Fabiana Mena from Argentina, and part of the task team consists of women from other G20 nations. This year, our priorities was on unlocking just energy transition, prioritizing the empowerment of women participation, and empowering women participation and their involvement in regional value chains, research and innovation. We are also looking at empowering women in terms of fisheries and aquaculture, and then unlocking the potential of rural women to tackle climate crisis and food security, as they are the ones who are largely impacted by it. Empowering women in, I've already stated, empowering women in fisheries and aquaculture, and also disaster preparedness. We also have a legacy project. For the past 10 years, Women 20 now is celebrating 10 years of existence. And for the past 10 years, we have been drafting a communique to inform the Leaders' Declaration. However, for the first time in Women 20, we now have a legacy project, which aims at leveraging the power of rural women for economic empowerment, climate response and resilience, digitalization, renewable energy access, and that's aimed more at providing affordable energy and reducing energy poverty and food security. The current state of climate change. For the first time last year, the global average temperature has gone beyond 1.5. Those who follow climate change will know that the limit that we have is 1.5, although that is measured over a period of 25 years. But if we start hitting the 1.5 each and every year, that's going to soon become an average. And that has adverse consequences on us as a humanity. It has adverse consequences on marine life. It has adverse consequences on wildlife as well. Global, yeah, I've already mentioned that, yeah. Atmospheric indicators. So we've had the highest greenhouse gas emissions last year. Also, the remaining carbon budget that we have is getting less and less. The physical impacts is that the ocean is warming, sea levels are rising and wiping certain communities out. We also have extreme weather events. I'm sure if you watch TV, you will have seen in the USA, we had large wildfires. We have more
effects of flooding. Where I come from in Limpopo, we have more droughts that we experience, and that not only has adverse consequences on us as human beings, but it also has challenges like food security and health. I haven't seen it happen, but some predictions suggest that we might have even people being displaced by climate. We start having climate refugees. So it is imperative for us to start acting because the consequences of climate disasters are far more dire than we can think. In terms of how we got here, 75.7% of our greenhouse gases come from the energy sector. And that is due to electricity and heat production. It is due to transportation, manufacturing and construction, building residential and commercial, fugitive emissions. And then the other one is from agriculture, which comes from 11.7%. Which is made up of livestock, agricultural soils, rice cultivation, and energy use in farming. More hydro energy, but they've had times where I think they've reached about 10 months of 100% renewable energy. We also have countries like Norway. And I know we're not all equally given, but in this country, our solar irradiance is fairly high. Some countries are blessed with water, which means they can exploit that for hydropower. Some are blessed with wind, some are blessed with geothermal. Whatever God has given each particular country, it can be leveraged to get to 50 to about 80% renewable energy. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the untapped potential of women. I'm from the villages of Limpopo, and I see potential where I come from. Most of the women there, 80% of the food production in Africa is the responsibility of women. If women can be given more knowledge in terms of regenerative farming, in terms of capacity of renewable energy, because renewable energy is much cheaper than our normal grid energy, it means you can maximize on profitability. So my call to action for this parliament is to invest more on renewable energy and to invest more on women. When we look at climate finance, women get the smallest chunk when it comes to that. The policymakers, can we put quotas in place to ensure that women representation can move from where it is? In renewable energy, I think we're standing at 32%. In normal energy, is still at 22% when we look at the global average. However, my call to action to everyone is to say, let's look at the opportunities that we have. Let's look at rural women. Let's look at women as a whole and see where we can invest on them for the upliftment of our communities and for the upliftment of women, and to ensure that we do not ignore 4 billion voices when we look at the global context in terms of women. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's any questions. Are we fine?
Yeah, I'll just take it if there are any questions for you.
I don't know.
Thank you so much again, Ms. Rekhoto. Honorable members, I would like to open up a session for any comments, questions that you would like to ask our resource person based on the 3 area topics that you spoke about around climate change. Just to give you context, we've been discussing this topic for the past hour, and there's some good inputs that came through, and I'm sure it will come through from the document as well. So I just want to see, are there any honorable members that would like to make comments, questions? Are we all good? All fine, clear. All right. Honorable member from Italy, yeah?
Thank you. Yes, a question indeed. Thank you. Thank you to our speaker. My question relates to the expression renewable energy and how it deals with the fact, how does it deal with the possibility of renewable energy being always clean? What I mean is that we talk and we use the expression renewable energy as if it is the solution to climate change. So my question is it always the solution, or it depends on how, for example, we extract critical raw materials that my colleague from South Africa was mentioning before? Or does it depend on how, for example, many countries can actually access to these resources? Is it always clean? Is it always the solution? Or we should maybe start reasoning about the processes that some countries use? Well, of course, the countries that are blessed with these resources, in order to extract the materials that we need in order to build the lithium batteries and everything that we know. And yeah, this is my question for you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, honorable member from Italy.
Thank you so much for that question. In terms of renewable energy, how do I put it? Not all countries are given the same, right? And not all countries are given the same resources. So it is imperative for each country to see how they are blessed in terms of the resources that they are given and how they can leverage off of that. In terms of renewable energy being clean, so if you look at the process of, say, solar, for example, and the process of manufacturing
lithium-ion batteries if you're going to use storage. That entire value chain might not necessarily be clean. However, it might be a portion and a small portion of it, right? And I like South Africa's aim of saying of manufacturing lithium-ion batteries if you're going to use storage. That entire value chain might not necessarily be clean. However, it might be a portion and a small portion of it, right? And I like South Africa's aim of saying of it, right? And I like South Africa's aim of saying responsibly. In South Africa, we have coal mining communities, right? We can't just shut them down without having a from between 50% to about even 100% of renewable energy. And I think it is something that each and every country should aspire to. Not only that, it is more affordable. If you look at the energy resources, right, wind is the cheapest, followed by solar. Should aspire to. Not only that, it is more affordable. If you look at the energy resources, right, wind is the cheapest, followed by solar. Percent of renewable energy, and I think it is something that each and every country should aspire to. Not only that, it is more affordable. If you look at the energy resources, right, wind is the cheapest, followed by solar. Some countries might not even be able to decouple from, for example, coal. However, that can be reduced to the bare minimum of what is required. And I think it is for it can be sufficient in the downtimes. Some countries might not even be able to decouple from, for example, coal. However, that can be reduced to the bare minimum of what is required. And I think it is for sure that we can use renewable energy. So I don't know if that covers your question, but yeah.
Question that response. Do we have any other comments or any inputs? Honorable members? All right, thank you so much again, Ms. Rekhoto, for your presentation. At the end of this is what action we need to take. So, honorable members, this brings this particular session to a close, 4 minutes just before time. On it, just to re-emphasize that we've got a responsibility parliaments to pay an oversight responsibility, contribute to legislation that is going to make sure that we're climate change resilient and and share ideas in places like this. Mere talk shop. I always say attitude is like a flat tire. If you don't change it, you won't go anywhere. And will not be secured in the future. So I would like to end the session here and call upon my colleague who is going to chair the last session for today, Honorable Sapo. Thank you so much for taking time to have contributed to the session.
Very much, Honorable Notata. Honorable co-chairing this session with the co-chair from Russia. He will introduce himself. My name is Malungile Sapo. I'm the Member of Parliament in the Republic of South Africa. We will take a presentation from Dr. Lekaba, and then after that, immediately he concludes his presentation. I will then allow my co-chair to come and deal with the rest of the session. Honorable members, Dr. Frank Lekaba is a senior researcher at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. He is a political scientist with a PhD in politics from University of Johannesburg in South Africa. His research interests includes the role of civil society in peace building in Africa, nation building and state building in Africa, and is in South African foreign policy. He is currently working on the research project that focuses on the participation of the youth in electoral politics as democratic resilience from below Senegal, Kenya, Botswana, and South Africa. The presentation will be on the youth-orientated institutions. He will be presenting on 6 areas that has been identified and outlined in the program that is within your PECs. He will be then focusing in those 6 areas. Dr. Lekap will be then focusing in those 6 areas. Dr. Lekap.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Good afternoon, honorable members. Out of the 7 questions that I was asked to reflect on, look, I'm a lecturer, as you have heard from the university, so we spend a lot of time talking. But today, because I'm in the House of the Honorables, where discussions, I will reflect on about 5 or 6 questions. There's one that I deliberately left out, which I think I would have more back to members of parliament. How can parliamentarians institutionalize youth quotas? That is one that I have left out of the 5 questions. So, ladies and gentlemen, the G20's theme under the South African presidency reflect few important considerations of how the world is shaped and how it should be reconfigured. Firstly, in my opinion, we are seeing the demise of the divide between the global north and the global south in terms of global challenges we all face. We all face the pandemic. We applied similar approach to how we manage the pandemic, the COVID-19, the migration issues. We all face the migration issues. We know how we approach them. The approaches are different, but the phenomenon is the same. Terrorism has been a big issue. Here in Southern Africa, we never thought we'll face this scourge of terrorism, but just in our neighbor here, in Mozambique, we lost soldiers there, 1 or 2 soldiers. South Africa is part of the deployment of the SADC in that region, in our region, and issues of peace and security are becoming much more critical in today's times. So these are all issues that are facing all of us. So the divide between the global north and the south, I argue, is facing the demise. In place of this demise of multipolarity, multilateralism should take the center stage. I argue that multilateralism is different from multipolarity. Multipolarity, we speak of more spheres or bits of power in the international system. Where else multilateralism, we talk of institutions that set norms, protocols, and all of that in the international system. I know there's this confusion most of the time. We speak of them interchangeably. But today, let's just draw that a little bit of geography between the two. Secondly, multilateralism should ensure a rules-based global order and agenda to democratize, particularly the UN system, particularly the UN Security Council, should be pursued. Thirdly, global politics are shifting towards common values and principles, although foreign policies of hard power is still being championed by big powers. And I made an example of this to say, when you look at the fact that we all convened under the Summit of the Future and came up with the Pact for the Future, this reflects the fact that we are coalescing around common values and principles globally. So the polarities that characterize the world, coming from the bipolar world to the current conditions we are in, is phasing out. So as we talk today, I would reflect on this, but I would want to also reflect a little bit on the agendas that we have, the global agendas. And to add on this point of the fact that we are coalescing, we have the Sustainable Development Agendas, we have the AU Agenda 2063. Most importantly for parliamentarians today, we are talking the youth. There is a Youth 2030. It's an agenda of the AU, of the United Nations for the youth, a youth strategy of development. So what structural reforms are needed to make institutions more responsive to youth needs? In the context of the G20, I think we need to think how the member states can be helpful in fast-tracking the implementation of the Youth 2030 and this youth strategy that I spoke about. And you'll see from my presentation, I'll be quoting from this Youth 20 report that has been released this year on the progress we have made in achieving this Youth 2030. The Youth 2030 implementation is gaining traction, although progress remains uneven since its launch. The strategy has steadily gained momentum across the UN system, with measurable improvements among both UN entities and country teams. UN entities increased their green scores from 45% in 2021 to 56% in 2024. That's like 6% increase. In the implementation of this Youth 2030 in a space of about 3 years. So it shows you that more needs to be done in implementation of this Youth 2030 agenda. While the UN country teams improved from 25% in 2020 to 43% in 2024, despite these gains, the system-wide milestone of achieving 80% or higher green scores on relevant key performance indicators was not met. So what do we need to do with the system we have to make sure that we don't just have an agenda, but it gets implemented and we can see the slow progress of the implementation? I think, one, there should be strengthening of the UN Youth Office. So there's a UN office in the UN system. That should be our major preoccupation on how we should strengthen it. One, the UN office needs to be included in the reform agenda of the UNSC. I know I may sound controversial here, or more ambitious, but this UN office, in my opinion, should feature as one of the organs of the UN. Particularly as we talk of the reform of the Security Council, should be part of the Security Council. And you should also, second point, replicate this UN office across regional and sub-regional multilateral organizations. In the context of the African Union, of the continent, the AU, in the context of our region, SADC, should have a similar office so that the implementation of the policy is harmonized. And then this, among other things, was also underscored in the UN Resolution 2250 of 2015, which states that urged members to consider ways to increase inclusive representation of youth in decision-making at all levels in local, national, regional, and international institutions. So for that question, colleagues, I think this is what we need to do. I'm proposing these two reforms that we need to champion within the context of how to do the structural reforms to realize the youth needs. The second question: how can youth be involved in the design and governance of institutions that affect their lives? One, I think we need to reconsider the forms of participation. The current forms of participation, in my opinion, whether you consider it politically and all otherwise, we are in small segments. We haven't had a wave. As in the form of, I know the women, they have managed to coalesce and they have a structure of the UN peace and security, and the women are having a common agenda, and we see a move there. So I think in the context of the youth, we need to also reconsider these forms of participation. And then the second point is to also consider transnational democratic innovations. How does a young person who is a parliamentarian in South Africa connect with a young person who is a parliamentarian in Brazil, a young person who is a parliamentarian in Chile, and then coalesce around common agendas? This is what we call in the academic space transnational democratic innovations. That's my answer to that question. The third question: how can Parliament institutionalize youth quotas in the context of South African political system, and this will differ from system to system. In our system, Parliament can pass a motion that makes it compulsory for political parties to observe both gender and youth quotas in their party lists as a requirement for registration and eligibility with the Electoral Commission. This should apply to provincial legislatures and both houses of Parliament. It should tilt down. So I think, in my opinion, that's what we need to do in my consideration, how to push these quotas. The third question then, what role do universities, think tanks, I'm coming from the university, and civil society play in shaping youth-oriented policy frameworks? One, I think universities are best places to convene discussions, dialogues, and all of that. They are a safe space to do so. They are open, they are transparent, and all of that. So they are good. We just had a national dialogue in South Africa. It was a good initiative. I think it would have been better managed. You know, it was snowballing from universities, carried through universities, up until we reached that national convention where everybody is brought in. So the issue of participation is clarified and all of that. And the national dialogue is not only an issue of contention here at home. I know in Eswatini, there's a serious contention of how the national dialogue should be conducted, although it's pursued by SADC and all of that. And in Lesotho, they have had a successful national dialogue where they reflected on the reforms and stuff like that. So universities are a good space to convene these kinds of engagements. And then two, universities are very good places as well to consider the issue of capacity building. Whether is it parliamentarians taking courses in the universities. I'm coming from a school of governance. We have designed programs. Among other things, when I arrived there, I found a parliamentary program that was there solely designed for parliamentarians. We run municipal programs and all of that. So this is what some universities can replicate, not only here at home but abroad. And then how can institutions improve access to finance, healthcare, education, and employment for the youth? Here, with regards to employment for the youth, internships are a widely used mechanism for capacity building. However, these initiatives need to be streamlined with work needs in such a way that there is direct link between completion of internship and employment opportunity. That a young person is not exposed to internship, and when it ends, then they go home, the unemployment kicks in and all of that. And something interesting from the report, the report I spoke about, the progress report, it says representation of youth in the UN workforce and internships needs to be improved. While an increasing number of UN entities are using data to inform their efforts, from around 70% in 2021 to nearly 90% in 2024, youth under the age of 35 continue to be underrepresented in the UN system. Efforts are underway to make internships more equitable and of higher quality, but systemic barriers persist. So this is from the report, and it's one of the things that as we talk today, we need to reflect how, as parliamentarians who are from the G20 countries, who have got representation in the UN, how do we address these issues? In conclusion, Chair, I want to say we're at a critical juncture of rethinking multilateral system. This should not be a wasted opportunity. There's at least a dialogue, a discussion on the agreement that the UN needs to be reformed, particularly the UN Security Council to open up representation and all. There is at least a discussion on that. So we need to take this opportunity seriously. G20 serves as an important bridge of the divide between the global north and the global south. Thus, this summit should reflect this in its declaration. This bridge. And then the last point I want to make a concluding remark. Young parliamentarians have an opportunity to influence how the pact for the future can be of benefit to the youth of the world. Demand more representation in structures such as the UNSC and push for more youth-oriented national policies with global imagination. In this case, solidarity, partnership, and equality are important values to espouse. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, уважаемый доктор Лекаба.
Mr. Frank Lekaba. So, friends, we had the chance to meet each other today, to get to know each other today, even if a little bit. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be here today. I would like to thank the South African Parliament for organizing this event, for this warm hospitality. Thank you so much. The Federation Council, the upper chamber of the Russian Parliament, is a very important institution. I'm member of this body. And historically, this G20 was designed to coordinate financial and economic mechanisms for promoting sustainable development, not only for the G20 country, but around the world. We're here, MPs, members of parliament. We reflect the voices of our people who elect us, and we, young parliamentarians, reflect the opinions of young people. It is sad to hear Nazi slogans coming from young parliamentarians. I would like to ask you to refrain from ideology-driven statements. Let's engage in constructive dialogue for discussing the topical matters that are on agenda. And one of the key topics on this agenda is the future of young people and how can institutions meet the aspirations and needs of young people. We're discussing institutional reforms for creating a more effective system for enabling the state to work and its agency to work with young people, to empower young people. We will discuss the way young people are involved in the decision-making process and the way they can access the key social and economic resources, how to defend the rights of young people in our challenging digital age. Friends, today our agenda covers a wide spectrum of matters, from parliamentary representation to ensuring digital justice. Open dialogue and inclusive dialogue will enable us to devise specific recommendations to improve the institutional environment for young people. I would like to once again thank Dr. Lekaba for your very insightful presentation, and I would like to open the floor for discussion. Our colleague from India is not here with us right now. I am opening the floor to all countries who want to take the floor and make a presentation. Go ahead, please. Anyone willing to take the floor? Okay. Go ahead, South Africa.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor, with the presentation. I think it's very important that as and when we deal with youth-oriented institutions, I think you were first supposed to, given that you are from the university, perhaps to share some insight on the role of the universities as far as not being ivory towers, but people's organs that drives the agenda at an academic or research-driven to ensure that young people, they are reflected throughout on sectors of power. Because one of the most things or important things that we should understand about the role of the university is that they're not just existing for a sole purpose of making profit, but their role is supposed to be developmental. And in this instance, their capacity to be able to drive research knowledge that is supposed to guide how young people can be involved or be accommodated. It must be research driven, because you understand that the laws of nature or how the nature operates, in as much as would have these engagements, that the old refuses to die while the young wants to occupy the space. So it's not a matter of a policy, it's about the laws of nature as well. They start to feature in, say that the old they will not want to give out power like that. It's not possible. And young people will have to fight for it, to be in that space and to be able to decide the future and not to decide the future that we are going to see, not them deciding the future that they are not going to see or that they are not going to be part of. But equally, the issue of the institutional memory is very important to guide the young people, say that when they are into the powers or the corridors of power, they need institutional memory. It's supposed to be there. So the dialectical relationship between the young and the old, I think the research academic point of view, it would assist us in to say that how do we strike a balance between the two so that the old must not feel that they want to be taken out of power by the youth, or it must not be seen as a battle between the youth and the old, because that itself, it creates that they must protect themselves from instead of accommodating young people in power. So, and the other issue, it's about the universities themselves, their role in shaping for or preparing for jobs for the future. Currently, universities are not prepared for jobs of the future. Why am I saying so? They still deliver outdated degrees, that they are not assisting the labor force that is constituted by the majority in the globe, in the world. They don't have the multidisciplinary courses at the basic degree level. You only have a multidisciplinary research, being the professors and the doctors that are doing that particular work. So it means that if the universities themselves are academical and research driven, they are not prepared. They are not preparing for jobs of the future, and because they are the ones that have a responsibility to prepare for these parliamentarians and young people that they are going to take over. If they are not doing that particular role effectively, they are also not playing a significant role in assisting that the youth occupy the space or leadership positions in institutions of power or on the people's against power. That is my contribution. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, уважаемый.
So much, colleague. I totally agree with what you said in terms of that we cannot take the decisions for young people. We have to work with young people and to take these decisions together. This is the only path forward in order to deliver on the agenda that we have in front of us. For example, in Russia, as I've already said, there are 39, almost 40 million young people. And today, the policy that we have and that we are ready to share as our best practice, this policy demonstrates that all young people who want to fulfill the potential, they have the necessary tools and a favorable environment for that. For example, we have in Sochi a special federal territory called Sirius. There is a foundation called Talent and Success Foundation. Anyone can apply and take part in the activities by this foundation, 7th grade and higher. So from middle school, if a school student believes that he or she is good in math, they can improve their skills by coming to this federal territory and benefiting from a 1-month course. For example, if a school student is good in sports, they can practice these sports with the leading training staff, be it ballet or soccer or anything else. If a school student is a creator, they like creating something, they like arts, they can work with the best teachers in all these domains, even if they come from abroad. So this is a very positive experience that we have in Russia for nurturing talent. I invite you to visit this foundation and to see this with your own eyes. And I wanted to say and to raise a topic that has not been raised during this session so far. There is also an educational program that is called Female Leaders, which is designed to enable women and girls to succeed. And just as in our educational projects that I've just described, any woman or girl in secondary school, high school, or in undergraduate study can apply for this program, and tens of thousands of young women have already taken part in this program. So today we have the Parliamentary Women's Forum that is taking place at the same time, where my colleague will share some insights on this topic. So thank you very much. So anyone else wants to take the floor during this session? Any other contributions to our conversation?
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. I think, Doc, we will allow you to make reflections on the points that were raised by the honorable members. Now that there is no other country that wants to make reflections, then thereafter we will try to wrap up the session.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks for the inputs. Critical inputs, but very important. Universities are not supposed to be static. They have to be dynamic because the environment is changing. So how we respond to that environment, we have to always relook into our course designs and all of that. I take it, I accept it. And how we do that, we must avoid instability as well. You can't teach a course this year and 3 years later is completely redesigned. So there are important measures of the course that must be maintained. So the issue of multidisciplinarity, I fully concur with it. And the approach we apply at the universities here in South Africa mainly, my own observation, is that multidisciplinarity is encouraged at an honors at the postgraduate level. The logic and the rationale here is, if you, for example, you study political science, you first have to understand the depth of political science. What makes up political science, the ideologies, the theories, and all of that. And then move from that premise. Of course, it will have courses of history, it will have courses of sociology, it will have economics and all of that. As major, some are ancillaries and all of that. But the major offering will be at the level of being fully grounded in political science. So that when you get to honors and you move from the political science level, you are well grounded in the theories of political science and all of that. So that's the approach at the universities. It's not enough. And just last week we had a conference of South African Association of Public Administration where we convened all public admin lecturers in the country and government officials. We had a whole week of engagement on what makes up public administration and how it should be changed. And it's a big debate, it's a big discourse. Among other things, the issues of multidisciplinarity are embedded there to say, what is public administration? Can anyone graduate with public administration? Where are they supposed to go? Why don't we say public administration in IT, public administration in water, public administration in, so that the student, when they graduate, they know their path. So it's one of the debates. So the university is a very difficult space to be in. It's a melting pot. Thanks to the Fees Must Fall and the Roads Must Fall movement, it sparked this movement of re-looking into our curriculum, re-looking into our course offerings and all of that. And this is how this issue of multidisciplinarity has come to haunt us in institutions. We are pushed to embrace this multidisciplinarity, but it's at the level of specialization when you go for a postgraduate qualification. The other issues of developmentalism, I think this one, if I'm to be the VC chair, I will respond very well on it to say how universities can be developmental. But you would remember one of the challenges with the Fees Must Fall here in South Africa was the issue of funding. how universities, students should be funded, and how universities should manage the issue of student debt. And it's been lately, there was also some discussions, national discussions around it, to say how do you open up access and all of that. So you open up access, universities are highly indebted, they can't pay for lecturers, they can't even pay for the research that lecturers need to undertake and all of that. So you have to strike a balance, among other things, that universities must not face their own demise as you open up access into the institutions. It means we need to grow more universities, we need to build more partnerships. We need to think that we should not only think that we can only study in South Africa. The opportunities are wide and open all over the world. Let's see how we take opportunity of those opportunities, and we ease the burden on teaching and learning. But thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Doc. Is there anyone that you are leaving behind? Okay, yes, you can come in.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our speaker as well, and to all the colleagues that joined the conversation. I also had the pleasure to give some information on what we are doing. So I'm addressing specifically points number 3 and 4 of our agenda. So what mechanisms exist to ensure meaningful youth representation in parliamentary processes? I will start by this, and I would like to talk about the case of Italy and of the Parliamentary Assembly of the OCE, since I'm an Italian parliamentarian and I am also a member of the Italian delegation at the OCPA. So on the Italian side, I'm happy to say that we are in the process of finalizing our national action plan for the youth, peace and security agenda from the United Nations. The youth, peace and security agenda grounds on resolutions from the Security Council of the United Nations, as we all know, especially resolutions 2250. From 2015, 2419 and 2532, just to give some references. And this agenda is very important since it builds on 5 pillars on how to better include young people in everything regarding conflict prevention or everything that must be done after a conflict exploded. And so we have the prevention, of course, the youth participation in the peace and mediation processes, as well as a new pillar, new with respect to the women's security and peace agenda, which is partnership with regional groups and an active engagement of the civil society. And so by finalizing this national action plan, Italy joins a nice group of 11 countries, most of which are actually from the African continent. So congratulations on this very good and big and concrete effort that very many countries are doing. And yes, so this is on the youth, peace and security agenda. We also are working around a law proposal which means to elaborate on a preventive analysis of the effects on future generations, especially environmental effects and social effects of some regulatory acts from the government. So we have laws from the parliament, but in Italy the government is also very prolific in producing laws. Let me say it like this. And some of the activity of the government in producing laws will be under this criterion, which is to analyze the effect on future generations. I think this is also a nice example of what can be done really concretely in order to going from words to acts. And let me add something on the OCPA, so the Parliamentary Assembly of the OCE. So this is something that relates to all the OCE regions, many countries, mainly in the northern part of the world. And there we have a special representative for youth engagement who is very active also in the context of electoral observation missions in dealing with the perspective of the young people while being in the electoral processes. And we also have a network of young parliamentarians. This network is meant to create a context where young parliamentarians, as we said before, sometimes we are not present in the delegations, sometimes we cannot really act concretely in this multilateral fora, where this network is meant to engage more and more the young parliamentarians. I have the honor to co-vice chair this network, and what is very useful of this network is not just that young parliamentarians can have a place where to be engaged, but also we conduct workshops on a national basis. So our countries, they make a workshop each and every year on a specific topic. The last 2 years was engagement of young people in international relations. The next year was brain drain as something affecting young people in many, many countries in all the OSCE region. And from this workshop, we take the insights from the young students that are invited to participate. And then we collect all together these insights in order to build a unique resolution that is presented each and every year in July, when the Parliamentary Assembly meets to vote resolutions and statements. And this resolution is then offered to all the Assembly for it to be voted. And for 2 years in a row, we have done this exercise, which of course it requires effort and engagement and time, but it's very rewarding, I must say, and the Parliamentary Assembly so far always voted unanimously in favor of this resolution, and I believe this is one concrete example of what I was mentioning here in the third point, so how to actively engage young people internationally speaking. And let me just also say something on the fourth point, more in the shape of a question, so something to continue reflecting on altogether. So how can parliaments institutionalize youth quotas? I like to be very clear. So I'm not sure, I'm a bit skeptical whether youth quotas in the way that we can think of is actually the way forward. So I also believe that the details around these possible initiatives generations to be more represented, which of course is a common aim that we all share, that youth people can be more and better represented. And let me just mention why I am a bit skeptical on this, but again, I would really love to reflect and consider altogether the pros and cons of this. Just as I'm not sure whether women quotas is the way forward, I also think that engagement, representation, maybe is a complex and difficult path. My perception is that quota is rather a shortcut, which might be useful for us to be maybe happy with our souls and awareness, like we did something that people can see, but I'm not sure whether we are really helping the process of being more engaged and represented for the young people, but we can apply also to women and to other groups of people in general. What can be a way in order to reach this goal, which I say is a common goal, to be better and more represented? Mechanism for representation. And I would actually look at the initial part of the process before looking at the very end. What I mean by this is saying that if we look at the national parliament, say at least 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever percentage you want, it must be done and given to people under the age of 40. We are looking at the very final step of the process. And we are so I'm afraid we are sort of playing dirty, if you want, like we are using an indicator, which is the percentage of people representing young people in the national assemblies, but we didn't work on the process. And to work on the process, I believe we should start at the beginning. So, for example, to support, and we have this in our declaration, we also have this part. So, for example, to support those among the young people who have the feeling for the common good, who show some initiative, some willingness. I would not say talent, because talent is only got to judge, but the willingness, right, to be part of this process. And there, I think we should remove all barriers that prevent people that have this willingness to participate. And just as let me quote the Article 3 of Italian Constitution very briefly, because also there is more about removing barriers than to put quotas. Because if we continue with the quotas, then, I don't know, we might want quotas for gardeners, for astronauts. We can think of many, many groups of people. And we say, well, they're not represented, meaning that good laws cannot be made for them. This is not true. A good politician, a good lawmaker can make good laws also for categories he or she doesn't belong to. For example, I'm a woman. I believe I have the duty to make good laws for men as well. And it's not just about having small percentages in the national assemblies representing each and every one. Because otherwise, I think we are a little bit losing what a politician should do, which is actually to represent everyone. For example, I was elected Italians living abroad. And I will end with this quote of Article 3 of the Constitution, hoping I didn't take too much time. It says, all citizens have equal social dignity and are equal before the law without distinction of sex, race, language, religion, political opinions, personal and social conditions. It is the task of the Republic to remove the economic and social obstacles which, by limiting the freedom and equality of citizens, prevent the full development of the human person and the effective participation of all workers in the political, economic and social organization of the country. So I would rather focus on removing barriers than creating quotas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Honorable Mkiza, do you want to say anything? Oh, okay. I thought you were saying I must note you. Doc, you can make reflection where you are, using the mic that is next to you. Oh, okay. Please hold on. Please hold on. Okay. Yes. Algeria.
Thank you. شكرا. مرة أخرى أود أن أشكر جميع المتدخلين فيما يخص هذه الجلسة.
Thank you so much for all the members. I want to just speak about the Algerian Parliament in using for the youth empowerment. للشباب باعتباره ركيزة أساسية ورافعة لبناء المستقبل أيضا. نحن we look تمكينهم اقتصاديا وسياسيا وكذا. Algeria had all the empowerment for the strategic choice. At the year of 2020, Constitution clearly enshrined the orientation. Article 6 affirms that the state works of encourage youth participation in nation development, while Article 7.1 guarantees freedom of innovation and invention as a right of all citizens. And this is provides people who are, I am an example of a young man from Algeria, represent my group of age. Algeria has established a legal and institutional framework to support youth interpretation law. The Algerian Startup Funds was created as a practical tool to finance innovation and foster the development of the digital economy. Alongside this legal and institutional reforms, Algeria has prioritized the development of vocation training system to equip young people with the skill required in the labor market, particularly in the high value added sectors such as digitalization and green economy and technological innovation.
ولعب الدور المحوري في إدماج الشباب في سوق العمل عبر برامج التوظيف والتكوين المهني.
In addition, specific institutions were created to support the youth employment and finance their projects, such as National Agency of Entrepreneurship and Finance development, which replaced ANSEJ and the National Unemployment Insurance Fund, CNAC. These institutions provide financial and administrative facilities to help young people realize their projects. The National Employment Agency, ANEM, also plays a key role in integrating young into labor market through employment and vocation training programs.
اعتمدت الجزائر في قانونها العضوي الخاص بالانتخابات نسبة 50% تحت سن الشرط كشرط تحت سن 40.
Upon strong political will and deeper legal reforms.
في الجزائر على مستوى جميع المجالس وهذا ما يعبر على الإرادة الجزائر في قانونها العضوي الخاص بالانتخابات نسبة 50% تحت سن الشرط تحت سن كشرط تحت سن 40.
Upon strong political will and deeper legal reforms.
في الجزائر على مستوى جميع المجالس وهذا ما يعبر على الإرادة.
Challenges, particularly in the financial and legal aspects. Moreover, the organic law on elections, which reserved a certain quota in electoral lists for the youth, has not achieved the desired impact in the strengthening their political presence and effective roles. In many cases, their participation has remained legally symbolic. Thank you so much, and good evening.
Yeah, that was a mountain for an English interpreter. Doc, you can make reflections where you are.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just on the last point of the quotas, I don't know how if members agree or not, and you are saying it's a point of reflection, honorable member from Italy, and you are sharing lessons with everyone here. But I think it is contextual, and it varies from political system to political system and the political culture. I would worry if we were to have a parliament where the conscience of representation is not, the conscience of equal representation is not a consideration, where women are not considered. And I hear your point. I'm not going to trivialize your point. Your point is very important, that we must at some point move beyond representation to look at the content. What is it that Lekaba represent? The ideas Lekaba represent, the agenda Lekaba represent. I fully agree with that we need to get to that point. But I want to argue that we will not even get to the point of interrogating the content and the ideas Lekaba represent if we don't have somebody like Lekaba in the representation. We'll talk of representation, we're underrepresented, and it's going to be our major argument. and a preoccupation. Where else we could have moved to say, what does, for example, now today I was reflecting on the UN Youth Office. It helps us to broaden the discussion, to deepen the discussion on what should be the role of the youth and all of that, than to start the discussion to say, are youth represented? So I'm saying that context is very important. And it varies from political culture to political culture. And this is why, the last point, Chair, this is why the AU came up with a What African Women Want campaign. And that campaign, I think it was, this is for correction, I think it was launched in 2020 or 2021, somewhere there. What African Women Want. It's very clear as to what women wanted in the continent, because in the continent, women are underrepresented. There's poor representation of women in parliaments and all of that. So this agenda was to say, let us push the AU as an instrument that is going to push its member states to go down at the national level to say, consider women in representation of your parliaments and all of that. So I'm saying, I take your point and agree with it, that at some point we'll have to look at what is the content of our representation here and the ideas. But I think the issue of which one is the end, which one is the beginning, it may be a point of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Друзья, вот хочу отметить один небольшой момент. Мы, парламентарии, можем быть согласны.
Dear friends, so in fact, following your comments, I understand that you could agree with each other or not agree with each other. But at the same time, now that's a very important moment, and I would like to express my gratitude to the representative of Italy, and the position that she voiced out actually is very close to ours. So thank you very much, and we completely agree with you.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Thank you very much, Doc. I think, honorable members, we are approaching the end of our session. But I think two things that I want to raise. One, to say we ought to accept that the world is becoming younger and faster than anticipated. And then, therefore, we would at some stage have to wind it down, the notion that always says nothing for us without us. Because the fact of the matter is that we are here now. And we are the representation of young people. How do we then use whatever representation we have to influence the policy decision? And how do we then use the representations that we have currently to make sure that our voice finds itself at the tail end of the decision making? But along the way, we then have a discussion on how do we then balance the injustices of the past, which speak then, of course, on the representation of women and the representation of young people that has been for quite some time be at the tail end. But I'm glad to say, Doc, when you say it is the discussion that we need to have as we go forward, linked to what was raised by Algeria, to say part of the things that is important, Doc, is how do we then capacitate our TVET colleges and use them as the hub for skills development so that they can be able to respond to the job market, because the fact of the matter is that not what is provided in the institutions of higher learning, like your universities, will then be able to respond to the job market. But what is important is to utilize the institutions that we have, like your TVET colleges, as a hub for skills development. Thank you very much, honorable members. I will then now call Honorable Hon, which is our House Chair from the National Assembly, to come and do the closing remarks for today. After him, we will adjourn for today and then reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the same room. But the representation of countries are are requested to remain behind for a few minutes so that they can be able to have a discussion on the joint statement that needs to be done thereafter. Honorable House Chair.
Firstly, thank you to the co-chairpersons for chairing this second session of the day. Honourable delegates, firstly allow me to make a few reflections on the climate change discussion earlier. So I believe what we took away strongly from these discussions is that young parliamentarians by and large felt that there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach to climate action. It was very good to hear that the delegates agreed that for developing countries specifically, the challenge is not solely to go green, but to go green while still unlocking growth. And that the task is to find a pathway where environmental sustainability and human development reinforces one another rather than undermining one another. What I also heard from you as young parliamentarians is that climate justice will only be achieved if it is recognized and properly given effect to that countries have a different starting point, and that through partnerships where responsibility is shared fairly and equitably is the only sustainable way to work towards climate justice. Then we came to the discussion which interestingly at first seemed to me as threatening to be a non-starter, and then later on it became very interesting, about the reorientation of institutions towards the youth. What I heard was very clear, and that is that you all agree that institutions cannot properly and effectively serve society at large if it's not responsive to the needs and the aspirations of younger generations. And in this regard, the discussion on the need for our institutions of higher education to be more agile was very insightful. I took away that reform will need to not only change structures, but to change structures in such a way that young voices will be not only heard, but also be listened to. And then in terms of the parliamentary participation of younger members of parliament, but also younger members of society, it was very interesting to note that everyone, despite differences in approach, agreed that to involve the youth, the discussion also, of course, spilled over into other marginalized groups, is not undeserved favor afforded to younger members of society, but ultimately an investment in the future. And then maybe, lastly, I must say that as somebody who no longer qualifies to be part of the Youth P20, and mindful of the theme of the Parliamentary 20 meeting this year, that we are to harness through parliamentary diplomacy global solidarity, I want to say that the point made earlier today, that ultimately if you are good enough, you're old enough, really gave me some heart for the future. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much, House Chair. Until tomorrow, 9 a.m., the House is adjourned.